Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today I'm going to be talking about what is the best used GPU that you can pick up right now in 2018 in lieu of the current increased cost of graphics cards, which has highly been impacted by RAM shortages as well as cryptocurrency mining, which has made picking up new cards nearly impossible, and when you can find them, you're usually spending anywhere from $200 to $300 or even more than that above what the cost of these graphics cards should be. So one of the ways that you can kind of combat this, at least for the time being, if you're a new system builder or if you have a really ancient graphics card or maybe your GPU even broke and you need to upgrade, is to actually go ahead and take a look at the used market. And my assertion is that the current best used graphics card that you can buy, or GPU I should say, and really this would apply to any manufacturer still producing this, is the GTX 970. So here I have the GTX 970 SSC. That's a super clocked variant from EVGA, and I'm going to be pinning that up against my GTX 1060 Founders Edition card, with both of them overclocked to the highest stable point that I could go on each of them, so that we can see the price difference. Because the GTX 1060, if you're picking those up new right now, you're looking at spending around anywhere from $400 to $600, possibly even more if you come into them on the wrong day. And you can find those used for around $350 to $400, which is still above what the cost should be, which is roughly $250 to $300, depending on the manufacturer that you're getting it from. So the prices on the 1060s are really high, but I knew going into this that the 970 wouldn't be that far behind something like the GTX 1060, which is extremely difficult to get right now in the current market. So we're going to be taking a look at these two cards. The GTX 970 SSC does have a decent overclock out of the box, but I ended up putting an extra 100 megahertz on the core and 200 megahertz on the memory, while also pushing the power limit slider all the way to the right, which I did on both of these cards. And on the 970, that saw it sitting around 1,530 megahertz for the core, which is quite high considering a reference model has a GPU clock speed of 1,050 megahertz. So a decent OC that we're putting on to the GTX 970. And for the 1060, I did the same thing. I pushed the power limit slider all the way to the right, and the highest stable OC that I could get on that was an additional 200 megahertz on the core and 300 megahertz on the memory, which is up again from the base GPU clock speed of 1,506 megahertz, and that brought it up to just over 2 gigahertz. So both of these cards, based on reference base clock speeds, we're looking at around a 500 megahertz boost by just doing an overclock. So that should keep the testing pretty fair going between these two cards, as I put them to the highest OC possible. Now, before I show you the performance numbers, I just want to take a quick look over on eBay so I can show you why I think the GTX 970 is going to be the best bet right now for used graphics cards. So if we look over here, I'm looking at right now, it's sold listings for used graphics cards. This is the GTX 970 page, and you can see that they're selling anywhere between $200 to $250. This one right here was an EVGA card, sold for $200, an MSI sold for $220, another EVGA card sold for $235, but pretty regularly you're looking at around $200 to $250. So not too bad at all for this graphics card, especially since it's still a beast for 1080p and even 1440p gaming, as you'll see fairly soon. The next card really up from that I would kind of focus on, at least from NVIDIA, would be the GTX 980 Ti, but those are going around $400 to $500, so it's a decent price increase. You're looking at about double, but the 1080 Ti is quite a monster, and it's not really in the same ballpark of the 970, so if you're wanting something a little bit higher end, the 980 Ti is worth looking at. That's really competing with the GTX 1070 as opposed to the 1060, so I'm not doing it in this testing here today. But you really can't go wrong with either of those cards if you wanted to get a higher end. Like I said, grab a 980 Ti, as they're still pretty reasonably priced. Now you might be asking why I'm not including an AMD graphics card in this. It's because their graphics cards are still very highly priced, even going back to the 200 series, because they're still very good for mining. So cryptocurrency miners are willing to pay more even for cards going back to the 200 series. As you can see, the R9 390 is selling between $350 and $400, which is the closest competitor to the GTX 970, and even going back to something like the R9 290X, you're looking at $250 to $300 for those graphics cards. And I would also argue that when it comes to picking a used graphics card or GPU, AMD cards are probably more likely to have been used for mining, so you're kind of risking it there that someone may have been using that card for mining, and it might have a lot of wear and tear on it when it actually arrives at your door, whereas the GTX 970 is not a very popular mining card because of the hash rate that it would have, and also the power requirements for these cards, as they're not as efficient as Pascal. So the likelihood that the 970s being used for mining is probably very low, and certainly lower than I would say for the AMD cards, where you're just taking a little bit more of a risk with those ones right there. So for testing, I was running on the latest driver from NVIDIA, which is 391.01 for both cards, the 970 and the GTX 1060. And for my test system, I was using my FrameRaider build, which has an i7 7700K in there at 4.8 gigahertz and 16 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM from G.Skill, which is running at 3200 megahertz. But with all that out of the way, let's get into our testing here with 1080p and 1440p, starting off with the average FPS, and then we will work our way into the 1% lows. So right now we're looking at 1080p average FPS. All of my benchmarking was done at high settings on both cards through every game and resolution that we tested here. So you can see these cards are actually very close in comparison. The one exception here was Overwatch at 1080p, probably because we're dealing with so many frames, so it had a bigger gap than some of the other titles here. But Battlefield 1, look, like it's 9 FPS difference there. Metro Last Light Redux, we're looking at about 6 FPS. Prey was a little bit more, looking at 15 FPS there, difference going from 138 down to 123. Rainbow Six Siege, we saw the GTX 1060 getting 110 FPS and the 970 getting 102. Shadow of War, we had a 10 frame difference on average, and then Sniper Elite 4 rounds out the list with only a 6 FPS difference. So that should show you that these cards, even at 1080p, are very, very close. On average, we're looking at a difference of maybe 5 to 10 FPS, with the one exception being Overwatch, and with the GTX 1060s right now costing close to double what you can get the used 970 for, it begs the question as to why you would even consider getting the GTX 1060 unless you just really want a new card and you're afraid of the used market, which I guess is understandable, although really the 970 I think is the best bang for the buck right now when it comes to used graphics cards, and it can even handle 1440p very well, as you can see here on the average FPS, still trailing behind the GTX 1070 by about 5 to 10 frames per second across pretty much all the titles here, and still maintaining over 60 FPS average in every game that I tested, with the exception being Shadow of War. But Sniper Elite 4 got an average of 67, Rainbow Six Siege 70 FPS, Prey 77, Overwatch over 100 FPS at 1440p on high settings, and the same is true for Battlefield 1 and Metro Last Light Redux, getting 75 and 79 respectively. So the 970 can definitely handle 1440p gaming at high settings, even on modern titles. So for $200 to $250, I think these cards are pretty much a steal right now compared to what else is out there in the market, even though it's a few years old. Going into our 1% lows now, you can see that it's still handling it very well, not really dropping down low enough that would make any of these games unplayable. The one exception kind of being Shadow of War, which had lows down into the 40s for both of the cards, though really at 1080p. Very demanding title, but in a third-person action game like that, it's probably not going to be too noticeable, as it doesn't really require the fast response times as something like a first-person shooter, because in Rainbow Six Siege, Overwatch, and Battlefield 1, that does require that fast response time, you're looking at averages 1% lows and averages above 60 FPS anyway, so it can handle those titles no issues. And looking at 1440p, the story is true here once again, although we did have more 1% lows coming down below 60 FPS on both of the cards really here in titles like Sniper Elite 4, Shadow of War, Rainbow Six Siege. Prey came down below 60 on the GTX 970, and then also both cards on Metro Last Light Redux. So I hope that this testing really just shows you that the GTX 970 is no slouch in gaming still here a few years after it's been out. And it can hold its own up against something like the GTX 1060 when both of these cards have been overclocked to the highest that they could possibly go. And with this being close to half of what the GTX 1060 is, if you are in the market for a graphics card right now around this price range, I think the GTX 970 would be a really good pickup, especially considering that we know graphics card prices are going to continue to rise through the third quarter of 2018, as I recently covered in a story on the channel where that was confirmed directly by NVIDIA. They said graphics card prices are rising through the third quarter of 2018, so there's no near end in sight for the high graphics card prices. So this could definitely get you through that period of time until prices stabilize. And then once prices do stabilize, if this is a new system for you, you can hold on to this as a backup graphics card, which is always a good thing to have. Or you could probably resell it at that time for around maybe $200 and get back most of what you put into it, picking it up used, and then you could put that money into a new graphics card once the prices are what they should be on. Hopefully by then we'll have the next generation cards from NVIDIA, but this should be able to get you through at least until then, I would say, for 1080 and even 1440p gaming. So you shouldn't have much hesitation about grabbing one of these used as long as you look into the sellers over on eBay. I will leave links down to eBay in the description below if you do want to pick up a GTX 970. I'll link you over to my search results on there, and that is an affiliate link, so I do get a small kickback if you pick up any cards while you're shopping over there, or pretty much anything really once you link over there. So please let me know your thoughts on this testing down in the comments below. If there's a different card that you think would be better than the GTX 970 from the used market, then leave that down in the comments, as I would look forward to seeing any other suggestions that you might have and the reason why you might suggest that over the GTX 970. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here, guys. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, don't forget to leave a like on it down below and subscribe if you're not already, and I will catch you in the next video. Sure.